Hey, Podcast Aquanauts. On this episode, you're going to occasionally hear the distant sound of children chattering away in the background. Even though this is our Oddtober spooky-centric episode, this is not some subliminal trick to make you associate kids with scary things. In these early days of the Podcast Aquatic, we just haven't found a soundproofed home for the studio dive cage, so we're having to record wherever there's a free room. This conversation you're about to hear just so happened to take place within earshot of the Aquarium's summer campers, hence the background noise. Spoilers, this was actually recorded in July. Anyway, just try to tune it out, and remember, kids are not spooky. Unless we're talking about Damien and the Omen, or those twins in The Shining, or Carol Ann and Poltergeist, or... You know what? Let's just get on with the podcast. Hello and happy spooky season, Aquarium Aquanauts. It's October, and here at the Aquarium that actually means that it's Oddtober, the time when we celebrate the weird and wonderful side of nature. But for a lot of you, you're probably thinking about things that are creepy and crawly and spooky. Spooky animals being things that we tend to have fear of, whether that's a learned fear or an innate fear. As it turns out, there is a study that came out a few years ago, back in 2019, based on the responses of more than 2,000 participants in this study. It was online. The two most common animal-centric phobias are of spiders and venomous snakes. And what's spookier than snakes and spiders, right? Well, I thought that today, snakes and spiders deserved a little bit of a better turn. So some good PR, so to speak. And to offer up a defense of why snakes and spiders are more deserving of your appreciation, I thought it made sense to bring in a couple of on-staff experts who can serve as a kind of defense counsel for these oft-maligned animals. So for today, we actually have our first returning guest to the Podcast Aquatic. Rose Segbers is our entomologist 2, correct?
Yes, I am the entomologist 2 here at the Aquarium.
All right, and give us a refresher for those of us who don't live and breathe entomology like you do. What exactly is entomology?
So entomology is the study of insects, but more specifically to what I do here at the Aquarium is I take care of the terrestrial invertebrate collection, which of course includes some insects in our education collection, as well as some spiders. And I also take care of our butterfly garden, which is what I'm most known for.
All right. And on the other side of the table here in the studio dive cage, we've got Charlie Olson. Charlie, you're our herpetologist. I'm not sure whether there's a 1 or a 2 after your title.
I'm a herpetologist too.
Okay. So what exactly is herpetology? Now, we've covered this in a previous episode, but in case you're just now tuning into the podcast and you weren't around for that, what exactly is herpetology the study of?
Yeah, herpetology is just the study of generally reptiles, but also herpetofauna in general. So that includes amphibians in there. And yeah, I'm basically in charge of taking care of some of our turtles, snakes, and most of our amphibian collection.
So as we talked about in a previous episode, there are a lot of turtles here at the Aquarium, and people sometimes, with kind of a note of panic to their voice, will reach out to us on social media and ask very specifically, do you have any snakes and where are they? And can I avoid them? So what species of snakes do we have at the Aquarium that people can see as they're touring?
Right now, I don't think we have any out on exhibit. We do rotate through our exhibits, so I really can't warn you about when I'm going to be putting a snake out on exhibit or when our education department might be having a snake around for people to get up close and personal with. But I can tell you that even when they are out, you have nothing to fear. We only have the best and brightest of snakes here at the Tennessee Aquarium.
I should also point out that the study that was conducted back in 2019 in the Czech Republic it actually distinguished between venomous snakes and non-venomous snakes. So the kinds of snakes that people tended to have a fear of or say that it elicited a response from them were specifically venomous snakes. We do not have any venomous snakes, correct?
Not currently at the moment. That is correct.
Okay. You said that really mysteriously.
I would also give a little pushback that maybe most of the people I talk to on a daily basis might not be able to identify the difference between a venomous and non-venomous snake.
That's true, actually. So unless you're looking at something that like a cobra, I think a cobra for most people, like king cobra, is fairly easy to identify. I mean, if it's about to bite you.
Yeah.
But other than that, that's true. And maybe we should get into that. We'll get into that a little bit later about how to tell them apart, because maybe that's the that will help you get over your fear of snakes if you can tell, oh, that's not a dangerous snake. That's not a danger noodle, as they've been called online.
Yeah.
Okay, but before we get too into this, I did want to begin with a quiz. And I told you about this just long enough ahead for panic to set in, but not long enough for you to actually do any preparation, so it's not exactly a fair quiz. But I thought it'd be fun, for me, not for you, to throw out some phobias to you and have you identify as best you can, probably by guessing, what that fear is of. Okay? So we'll begin with one that I think is fairly easy. If you just kind of think about the word and break it down, and feel free to play along, Podcast Aquanauts, as you're listening to this, and see if you can identify it. Equinophobia.
Fear of horses?
Ooh, point to Rose.
Oh,
Equinophobia is the fear of horses. Apophobia.
The fear of losing an arm.
Wouldn't that be amphiphobia? Probably not.
Look, it's obvious I didn't study. And it's obvious that you did study for this.
I didn't.
Rose, you do have your phone out. Are you cheating?
I am looking up a list of medically significant tarantulas so I can speak intelligently on it.
All right, fair enough. All right, so apophobia, you think fear of losing an arm. Do you have any guesses,
An
Rose?
appendage, maybe.
Yes.
Okay, it is the fear of bees.
Bees.
Oh, apophobia. Yeah.
Oh, I said it wrong. So, spoiler, Podcast Aquanauts, I do not pronounce things the way they probably should be pronounced, especially when it comes to Latin and or Greek words. So that's probably going to be true in future episodes as well.
I do think maybe the entomologist should lose a point for not getting that one.
I think so. I could be wrong, though. I've just never heard
you're right.
that suffix pronounced without a hard A.
No, you're probably right.
Apiary, yeah.
You're probably right. Trypophobia.
Oh, that's the fear of holes.
It is the fear of holes. I actually have this fear when I see things like lotus heads that don't have the pods in them anymore. It really gives me the skeevies.
Yes. Most people bring these up with pippa frogs, which are the frogs that keep their babies in small holes in their backs.
I love those frogs.
I know what you're talking about, and I wish you hadn't brought it up because now I'm like, I can feel my skin crawling. Moving on. Nephophobia. A lot of frowns. And thoughtful faces.
Nepo, like that.
Nephophobia.
Fear of kidneys.
Of kidneys? Okay.
Like nephritis? I don't know.
Sure. I like the way your brain is working through this. Charlie, any thoughts?
My brain's not working through it at all. Fear of death? I don't know.
Okay. I can see where you're going with that. Nephophobia is the fear of clouds.
Clouds?
What?
Who's afraid of clouds?
Well, people who have nephophobia.
Look, I don't want to put down anyone's fear, but if you're afraid of clouds.
Well,
I mean, clouds cause a lot of damage to like structure and
all
rain.
of this is such good. It's just good foreshadowing for the conversation to come. I'll just tell you that. A couple more though before we move on. Thalassophobia.
Fear of the deep sea.
She knew it. She did study, Charlie.
Yeah. She
cheated. It is a fear of deep sea or more broadly open water where you cannot see land. So you could be on the Great Lakes, I guess, and experience a bout of thalassophobia. All right, I'm not going to get this one. I'm not going to pronounce this correctly. So if you're listening, prepare to wince, I guess. Anatodeophobia.
I don't know.
Anatodeophobia? I might be one of those two pronunciations is correct.
No,
yeah, I don't
even
know.
have a guess.
All right, this one's a good one. I like this one a lot. This is the fear of a duck looking at you.
The fear of a duck looking at you.
Apparently, it's a legitimate thing. I did not know this. And again, we're not putting down anybody's fear. If you have fear of ducks watching you,
does this include geese?
I don't know if it's specific to ducks, and maybe it's all waterfowl. I don't know. Okay, I had to look into this a little bit more. It's apparently pronounced correctly as either anatodeophobia or anatodeophobia. Either way, it's not listed as an official mental health condition in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Shocker, I know. Anyone who's a fan of Gary Larson probably smelled this a mile off, but this is actually a joke referencing a Far Side comic. This is absolutely just a memed fear. If you actually have this condition, though, please email us at podcast@tnaqua.org because maybe we can enact a sea change in the field of psychiatry. Anyway, the ducks was the one that came up. Coulrophobia. Coulrophobia.
No idea.
All right, I'll give you a hint. If you were to watch a pretty famous Stephen King movie,
Clowns.
Fear of clowns?
It is the fear of clowns. The fear of clowns. All right, so we've established that you two, you know a decent, well, one of you knows a decent amount about phobias.
I don't know anything.
But
I got fear of holes down.
but since we're going to tell people why they maybe should not be afraid of something, I think it only fair to ask the two of you, do you have phobias? Are you afraid of anything?
I'm going to say this, and Charlie is never going to let me live it down because he sees me confront my fear a couple of times a month. I'm afraid of ladders. I am petrified of going up ladders.
Ladders specifically or heights?
I'm fine with heights, just ladders. Like, ladders kill more people than snakes. Ladders kill more people than sharks. Like, ladders are terrifying.
Your fear is much more deadly than my fear.
What's
And I've actually recently gotten over my fear. I used to be very afraid of crickets.
Really?
Which is not a good fear to have as a herpetologist.
I say, as a herpetologist, you have to deal with that a lot.
Yes. But recently, I didn't want to look like a big baby in front of my friends. And so I powered through and pretended like I wasn't afraid of crickets for long enough that now I am no longer afraid of crickets.
Good for you.
Thank
Good
you.
for you. Okay, so in full disclosure, I am a lifelong arachnophobe. So this one's going to hit pretty close to home for me. I have done my level best to confront my fear here at the aquarium as often as possible, just to sort of see if I could work it out of myself. And I think I've come to, if not a love of spiders, at least a respect of spiders. So arachnophobia, to that reel it back in case that's a word that you have never heard before, that's the fear of spiders and other arachnids. I'm assuming it also applies to scorpions and ticks and such.
Yep, it's generally meant to be spiders. And I think, I'm obviously not great with phobia words. I think there is probably another word for fear of ticks.
Probably.
Just because it's a very specific thing. Like, I feel like it might be more of a general parasite.
Can you imagine how
fear.
much different the John Goodman movie would have been, arachnophobia, if it had been just ticks and not a big spider, just a big tick?
So here's some fun movie trivia I know. Apparently, arachnophobia, the actors grew to really like the spiders that they were working with just because they wound up being like their coworkers.
Wow.
And they were exposed so much that those that were kind of afraid got over it.
Again, I have done what I can to, when confronted with some of our rather large spiders, not shy away from them. In fact, the moment that put that fear to the greatest test was a few years ago when, for Oddtober, for our spooky season celebration here at the aquarium, I had to get a picture of tarantula claws.
Oh, yeah.
So that necessitated tarantula claws being, as you can probably imagine, pretty small. I had to get really, really close with a camera and a macro lens, which, I mean, I couldn't have been more than an inch and a half away from this spider. So I have done my best, and I just don't think I'll ever be a huge spider fan, even though, as I think we'll talk about later, I do understand their ecological role and value, and that sort of helps to balance the scales a little bit. All right, so we've covered what you two are afraid of. To not sound like we're shaking our heads or wagging our fingers at people who do have phobias, animal-centric phobias are actually the most common kind of phobia. But there's a reason why animal-centric phobias tend to be the things that, or why animals tend to be the things that people fixate on and have a fear of. And actually, before we get too far into this, we should probably define what a phobia is. So it's not just a fear, because fear can be a useful biological response to keep us safe. Phobia is not just a normal fear.
Yeah.
So according to Johns Hopkins Medicine, a phobia isn't just like a slight anxiety or a nervousness about something, an object or a situation or activity. It is an uncontrollable, irrational, and lasting fear of a certain object, situation, or activity that can be so overwhelming that a person will go to great lengths to avoid the source of that fear. So I think the important word to to fixate on there is probably irrational. It goes above and beyond what the normal biological response to an object or a situation would be, that's designed to sort of keep you safe and can, as the definition implied, have an impact on your life. So to go back to that 2019 study, what they did basically was to show people pictures of 25 different kinds of animals. So again, this was a study of animal-centric phobia. So it wasn't looking at things like fear of the dark or of heights or public speaking or ducks watching you. It was very specifically about animals. And so what they would look at is they had them fill out questionnaires related to disgust and fear, basically. So what kind of reaction did you get from looking at a picture of, say, a spider? How did it rank for you in terms of your disgust, and how afraid did it make you? And those are the two components of phobia. So sometimes it's not so much an actual fear of like, this is going to hurt me, or this could be dangerous or lethal even. For me, it could just be a matter of a disgust response. So for me, the trypophobia, the fear of holes, is really more, it's not a fear of the danger that they present. It's really more of, it just makes my skin crawl.
Yeah.
It's a disgust thing. So it sounds like, Charlie, for you, crickets were, back in your phobia days, it was more of a disgust response. Is that right?
Maybe a mixture of both. I feel that maybe you can't fully have one without the other. A little bit of fear, a little disgust. Maybe it's on a spectrum. You know?
It is on a spectrum. And if I will do my best to link the studies that I'm referencing in the course of this conversation in the show notes, so that you can actually go and look at this yourself. There's a graph that shows what you're talking about. And on one axis, I think the y-axis will just say that was disgust, and the x-axis was fear. So going up was fear, or going up was disgust. Going left to right was fear. And so in this situation, if you can create the mental picture for yourself, the lower right corner, so extreme fear but no disgust, was a bull. So of all the things that they showed people a picture of, the thing that elicited that's a dangerous thing response was a bull. And the thing that elicited the greatest disgust response was like tapeworms and maggots. So looking at you, Rose, you apparently work with actually that's good. So looking at the two of you, Charlie, you would be representative of more of the animals that elicit a fear response. Snakes, and venomous snakes in particular, were more on the fear side of this graph. And in your case, spiders and some of the other invertebrates and internal and external parasites were disgust, but not as much fear. It was just like a creepy crawly kind of response.
Yeah, I was kind of looking at it, and I think spiders are obviously the big exception there, because people do look at spiders and think that can hurt me, but things like parasites and maggots and that sort of thing, there's more of an association with like death and decay, and I think it makes sense that we would have a natural response to death and decay to try to put distance between ourselves in that.
Exactly. It's a lot of these fears that we have, when they don't step over the line into a phobia. So the not irrational fear, the rational fear of some of these things is designed to protect us. So in this study, the reason the two of you are in the room and not somebody who represents something like alligators, which I'm sure would probably elicit kind of a fear response, is that spiders and venomous snakes evoked a strongest response in both disgust and fear. So they were the outliers, or the top of the heap when it comes to being things that people said that they were not only afraid of for their life, but also because it just icked them out, so to speak. 19% of respondents to the study, which was conducted online, reported an extreme fear or terror when shown a picture of a spider, and then 10% had that same response to a picture of a viper or a venomous snake. Do you find that surprising? You don't have these fears, but you work around these animals a lot, and presumably in the course of your jobs, you interact with the public and experience their reactions to these animals. So are you surprised to find that these two kinds of animals are the ones that got the strongest response in this study?
No, not even a little bit. I know that even on not even specifically animal-based fears, those two they have to be top 10 of just all fears of everything in general, not even just animal-based. They seem to be, at least in my experience, the one of the most common fears that people have in general.
Yeah, I definitely have the same experience. Like, I will have guests just sometimes out of the blue ask me if we have any venomous snakes or spiders in the exhibit so that they can avoid them. Like you mentioned, we have people writing in on social media asking about the venomous snakes and that sort of thing. And I've definitely had guests ask me while I was doing butterfly programming, do you have any spiders here? And obviously we do. They are primarily in our education collection. But yeah, people do have, it's in the forefront of people's minds.
So if it makes anybody who's listening to this who has these fears feel any better, I mentioned Stephen King earlier, and another study that I looked at in preparation for this episode, and again, I'll link this in the show notes, but talked about what Stephen King's what his self-reported fears were. And on that list were a lot of the fears that we all share. His number one fear was his fear of the dark, which a lot of people, when I was younger, I had a fear of the dark. But on that list also were snakes and spiders. So don't feel as if you are being targeted. The fact that so many people have this response is not surprising when you think about, again, the role that fear plays for us biologically. It's just the fact that it steps over the line into phobia that I hope we can maybe do some good work to reel people back a little bit from the precipice, from the edge of the fear, and get them back into a little bit more of a grounded state. So fight fear with knowledge. Here at the aquarium, we, as mentioned previously, we do have snakes and we do have spiders. Rose has already mentioned that the spiders that we have are primarily in our ambassador animal collection. So the ones that you see when you're in the galleries, if you are over here and there's a cart program, so someone walking around with a mobile cart and usually an animal on it, those are the opportunities you're going to have to see the spiders usually. But Charlie, in your case, the snakes, when they are on exhibit, are permanently on exhibit. So what are some species that we have that people could see during their visit here?
Yeah, so we mostly have native snakes on exhibits. We have our black rat snake, who's the first animal you see as you come into the aquarium. And then we also have a milk snake. We like to sandwich the otters in between there as like a little reward for those people who maybe are a little more afraid of the snakes. Give them a little break with some cute otter time. But even then, with our education collection, we do have some more exotic snakes, but we do also have more native snakes that they'll bring out, things like corn snakes. And then some of the exotics that have been brought out from our education collection are like red-tailed boas from South America.
Very cool. And then Rose, you again work with some of the spiders. So what spider species do we have that people, if they encounter one of those cart programs, they could potentially see?
So we have 2 tarantulas right now. We have a curly hair and a pink toe tarantula, and neither of them are at this point being like free handled or anything like that. So you don't have to worry about an educator coming up to you and like shoving them in your face. We are pretty mindful that people are afraid of these animals, but you will occasionally see them be brought out in containers just to show a little bit about them and talk about their natural history. And unfortunately, I can't give you any guarantee about where those animals will be because we have cart programs all over the aquarium.
And the thing that gets me about the spider program isn't so much the spider itself, which, as you mentioned, is usually in an enclosed habitat, so you're not going to touch it. But we also have spider molts.
Oh, yes, which you are more likely to see. We have several species of spiders, and we have in the past, and we've saved their molts.
So explain what a molt is for someone who hasn't had that enter their nightmare fuel container before.
So I will add to the nightmare fuel. Sometimes people will see a spider in their household and they will notice that it's just kind of lying on their side, and they'll think, oh, well, at least it's dead. Sometimes that is not a dead spider you are seeing. That is what's called a spider's molt. And what that is that spiders have an exoskeleton. So their skeleton is on the outside. And when they get bigger, they can't necessarily, the skeleton doesn't get bigger with them. So what they will do is they will shed that exoskeleton and leave it behind. And that is the molt. And sometimes it looks suspiciously like a dead spider.
So instead of a dead spider, you actually have a bigger spider in your house
that
somewhere.
you don't know about.
Yes.
You don't know where it is. It's just somewhere else.
So to be fair, snakes do much the same thing.
Yes. Snakes do shed their skin. It's a little less of a process than maybe a tarantula molting. But they, get a little scratch and usually comes off in one nice big piece and they're ready to go. And one of the most common questions I get is how often they shed their skin. It really depends on how much they're eating, what time of year it is. Sometimes it might just be a couple of weeks in between those sheds. Sometimes it might be whole months. And they go a really long time, especially if they're not growing very quickly.
And when they come out, they just look so pretty.
They do. And right before they shed, they're basically completely blind. They can't see anything. They're a little more feisty because of that. Imagine if you also couldn't see and things were touching you. And then afterwards, they get a nice, fresh, beautiful skin that everyone gets to see a little extra shiny.
So we've, society, I guess, has done a lot of spider and snake bashing, sometimes literally. But I wanted the two of you to come on here, not just to test your knowledge or lack thereof of phobias, but to serve as positive PR for spiders and for snakes. So I put forth the question to you then, why should people not be afraid of snakes and spiders? And Charlie, I guess I'll ask you first. Why should people, when they see a snake, not turn and run the other direction, but maybe tip their hat and say thank you?
Yeah. First I'll say, do what you want, except don't kill them. You can be a little afraid of them. Having a healthy respect for animals is definitely something that we should all harbor, especially animals that you're not very knowledgeable about. But it's a different thing when you're directly involving yourself with that animal. As you may have heard, most snake bites happen from human-animal interactions where a person is trying to kill a snake or someone's messing with a snake. So it's always best to, if you don't know about them, giving them some space and enjoying them from afar. And then once you learn maybe a little bit more about those snakes, you can get a little bit closer and interact with them a little bit more. But I definitely don't want to fully take away the fear of snakes from the general population because there are inherent risks there. But they are very beneficial in a ton of different ways. I mean, just for me personally, they're just beautiful to look at. We have some of the most gorgeous snakes here in North America.
What's your favorite?
My favorite North American snake?
Specifically.
It changes every day. Right now, I'm on a big queen snake kick for some reason.
We've seen some of those when we go out into the field to cover some of the work our scientists are doing. They are really pretty.
Yeah, they're beautiful snakes. They have a very interesting life history. Most of their diet is primarily made up of malted crayfish. Which is just a really crazy specialty to have.
It's a very specific diet.
Yeah. It's like if you were just eating soft shell crabs every day for the rest of your life.
It does make sense, though, because we have seen them primarily when we work around streams. So I'm guessing they would be mostly an aquatic species or at least around water.
Yeah, they spend most of their time in the water, around the water. You don't really see them anywhere that's not directly next to faster flowing streams and rivers because they are just eating those crayfish.
Anyway, I distracted you. So you were saying ecological value, though.
Ecological value, yeah. Tons of different things. First off, their rodent control. They eat tons of mice and rats. Another thing that people are afraid of.
That's true.
I mentioned probably top 10. Well, maybe not that high up, but
they're pretty high up. They were on that again. If you reference the study, they show up primarily. I think that, again, they're on the upper end of the disgust axis of this study.
Yeah, so that's one fear taken out of fear. That's a net loss of fears in one area for a lot of people.
Taking them out of the equation.
Exactly. Mice and rat damage is millions of dollars here in the United States, and most of it's treated with poisons and things like that can be harmful for the environment. When snakes can fill that role and eat plenty of the mice and rats that are in this area.
Based on the 2019 study, there's probably a not insignificant percentage of the Podcast Aquanaut core who are afraid of rats. Rats were reported as roughly half as disgusting and or terrifying as spiders by the respondents of that study. Fortunately, as Charlie points out, snakes are a great check on rodent populations. Some species like gopher snakes and the aptly named rat snake are a primary predator of rats and can hunt down dozens of them every year, or multiple times that number of mice, which tend to be smaller. So, if you don't like rats, be sure to give the next snake you see a nod of appreciation.
On top of that, there have been medical advancements made through snake venom, specifically with some of the vipers in South America. They've made blood pressure medications from compounds that they've been able to extract from those venoms. And they are important in the food web. They are eaten, and they also do eat a lot of things. There are some animals that are obligate snake eaters, that most of their diet consists of snakes. And so snakes are obviously important for those animals. And then,
do you have any examples off the top of your head of animals that are primarily snake eaters?
Yeah, there's a bird in South America, Seriama, which are known for taking snakes and bashing them on rocks. They eat other things too, but a big majority of their diet would be consisted of snakes. You can watch some videos of them giving them some fake snakes at zoos and watch what they do with them, or even golf balls, and they'll whack them on the ground. They'll fly 10 feet up in the air. They're throwing them so hard.
I think a lot of people who have fear of snakes that's how they would respond to seeing a snake.
Yeah,
but then they wouldn't eat it afterwards. So, okay. I know we just had an aside, but this long-legged, long-necked South American bird really deserves a more detailed description. My favorite bird, personally, is probably a kingfisher. Any of them, take your pick. But the Serema has got to be in the running after looking it up. It's got a fringe of feathers at the point where its beak begins, kind of like a front-loaded mohawk. And if that wasn't punk enough for you, you've got to watch the video that Charlie name drops here, because holy cow. Whether it's a real snake or a plastic lizard they're using for demonstration purposes, the way these birds kill their prey is really something to behold. They lift their long necks up and back with the animal still in their beaks before whipping it down onto the nearest hard surface so hard that it will bounce. It's as brutal looking as it is effective. As Charlie suggests, though, it's really got to be seen to be fully appreciated. So check the show notes for a demonstration video that I found online.
But even though we're afraid of snakes, they are large-bodied, slow-moving animals that are actually very vulnerable to a lot of other animals. And so a lot of things do eat snakes, especially baby snakes. But even larger snakes, even coyotes and things would definitely eat them. So they're an important part of the food chain. They're important to human history and culture. Humans have always had stories about snakes. We've lived alongside snakes for as long as we've been humans. So we do have deep ties to these animals.
Well, and that is partly the reason why there is a latent fear of snakes. It is one of the fears that, per another study that I read, is hardwired into our DNA.
Exactly.
Because it is they are a type of animal that we have associated with danger for such a long time. It is an instinctual response for a lot of people to look at a snake, and just the sight of a snake will elicit a fear response, because those are your genes telling you, do not interact with that animal. That animal could pose a danger to you.
Exactly. Yeah. Everywhere people have lived, there have been snakes. For as long as we have been around, there have been snakes.
Yeah, and the same is true of spiders. So the fact that both of those are such common fears makes a lot of sense when you think about it in the terms of the span of time that humans and those animals have coexisted in oftentimes the same spaces.
Yeah, exactly.
So we have now covered well, I don't want to actually cut you short. There are a lot of values to snakes, but are there any other things that ways that snakes benefit us that you want to put on the table for people to consider?
I feel like I could really talk for hours about the benefits of snakes. But I mean, those are the broad groups of it.
The cultural significance is something I hadn't really considered, but that does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, there is. I mean, almost every single culture has stories about snakes, and they're not always bad parts of those cultures. I mean, if you look at like the symbol of medicine, the staff has a snake on it. And one of the reasons it's on there is that they shed their skin, and it's like a renewal of themselves.
All right, for those of you who aren't doctors, the symbol Charlie is referring to here is called the staff of Aesculapius, who the ancient Greeks revered as the son of Apollo and, fittingly, the god of medicine. According to a journal article published in Modern Medicine, Aesculapius suffered the fairly common fate among Greek deities of being slain by his grandfather Zeus because his healing skills were responsible for preventing enough people from passing into the underworld. A similar symbol, the caduceus, is a staff entwined by 2 snakes instead of just 1. This was carried by the messenger god Hermes and originally was used as a symbol by diplomatic ambassadors. In modern times, though, this symbol has also come to be associated with medical practitioners, including, famously, the United States Army Medical Corps. So it's easy to see when you look at these 2 symbols side by side how they came to be confused, but just remember that the real OG symbol of healing is the staff of Aesculapius, not the caduceus. As you pointed out earlier, if you do have arachnophobia or ophidiophobia, which is, I can't believe it's taken this long into the podcast to mention it, but that's the name for a fear of snakes. If you have ophidiophobia or arachnophobia, the safest way to have an interaction with those animals is to look at them and not try and touch them. So as I tell my kids, and I've brought this up on previous episodes, we look with our eyes and not with our hands.
Exactly. It's one of those things where maybe the fear isn't based is not completely unjustified. We are very lucky in the United States that there are not a lot of deaths from venomous snakes. Maybe only 2 or 3 a year on like a bad year. But that's not true for other parts of the world. There are still thousands of people that do die from venomous snake bites. So it's not a bad fear to have in the self saving aspect.
In the scope of human existence, it's
exactly.
not an unsafe thing to have.
Yeah, and not even to today, especially if you're visiting other countries that have way more venomous snakes than we do and way worse venomous snakes. But it's also important to know that snakes aren't out to get you. They're not like chasing you down. Most of the time, the reason they've developed these venoms is for hunting strategies, and they don't really want to waste that venom on you. Seeing them, giving them some distance, appreciating them is great. The more you learn about them and learn about the natural histories of individual snakes, you can learn like, oh, that's a black rat snake. I can go hang out with this guy. Black rat snakes are one of the best snakes to get people to interact with because if you know what you're doing and you see one in the wild, they're one of the few snakes that you can just pick right up in the woods. And it's almost like it was someone's pet that they put out there. They're so docile in general.
I am going to issue the disclaimer that we are not, via the Podcast Aquatic, encouraging you to go out and pick up a snake, even if you know what that species is. I'm going to stick with look with your eyes, not with your hands. As a general rule, please do not go out and pick up a snake.
Yes. Give it some respect. I will say, as docile as they are, I have gotten some nasty bites from some black rat snakes that I have picked up. So that risk is always there. I do also say, not to convince people more to pick up some snakes, I do think for a lot of people, thinking about being bitten by a snake is way worse than actually being bitten by a snake. For a lot of the snakes that I've been bitten by, and I've been bitten by a good amount of snakes in my time, it barely even breaks the skin. We sometimes jokingly call them angry Velcro because it just feels like Velcro like sticking to you a little bit. But
I'm starting to have second thoughts about bringing you on this podcast.
You hear that, kids? Charlie's telling you to go pick up some snakes. Don't let the system stop you.
Yeah, please
come to the aquarium. You won't be able to hold a snake there, but you will be able to see a snake up close and personal.
Yes, seeing an animal is different than trying to interact with it. So what you mentioned earlier, and Rose, we will get to your defense of spiders here momentarily, but the the fear of being attacked by animals has always struck me as really interesting. It almost speaks to the narcissism of our species, that we assume that an animal must want to attack us because we're so important, that why would they not want to come and try and eat us?
Yeah, I've heard about a million stories of people being chased by snakes. And most of that is from a misrepresentation or a misunderstanding of the animals that they're around. Snakes have a natural fear of humans, and that, you know, they have the same thing of fight or flight responses when they have that fear.
We're much bigger than them.
Exactly. And a lot of things that like are our size are eating them. And a lot of times when they are scared and they're running away, they're just running in any direction. They're not really thinking too much about it. So I've often had snakes run right in between my legs, which, if you don't know a lot about snakes and you're afraid of snakes, could very easily be interpreted as this snake is chasing me down.
An act of aggression, yeah.
But if you really think about it, I mean, what is a non-venomous milk snake going to do if it runs right at you? And like, it could bite your leg, but then what? You know, there's
then it's put itself in a really precarious situation because it's really close to an animal that is, again, much bigger than itself.
Exactly.
Again, phobias, by definition, are illogical.
Yeah.
They are not a logical fear. If you have a phobia, it is generally something that is graduated beyond the scope of a normal biological instinctual response to an animal, and has become something that could be very problematic for you. And so again, no one is finger wagging at people who have phobias. I feel for you. I am in some respects one of you. But Charlie, we have said our piece, I think, about snakes. Rose, I want to give you a chance to stump for spiders. So I just predicting here, I'm guessing that a lot of the things that Charlie mentioned about snakes as being a positive probably apply to spiders. But go ahead.
Absolutely. I actually have been, as Charlie is saying things, like developing a catalog in my head of all the points that are very, very similar. I'm actually going to agree with what Charlie said previously about how fear is useful for us as a species. It has been historically. It's useful to us right now. With spiders in particular, a lot of the spiders that we have historically been afraid of are spiders that share our habitat.
Okay, not to heap fuel on the arachnophobia fire or anything, but the truth is, whether you realize it or not, spiders are probably around you at all times. That includes in your home, based on the findings of a 2016 study by entomology students at North Carolina State University. The researchers combed 50 homes in the Tar Heel State for arthropods, so insects, spiders, and crustaceans. Of 550 rooms that they looked at, only 5 were found to be free of arthropods. That's a 99.1% cohabitation rate. In fact, some homes had more than 200 species of arthropods living alongside their human hosts, kind of like a group of kids who managed to slip past store security to camp out overnight in an IKEA or a Target. In all, researchers found 10,000 specimens of arthropods during this study, and of these, the 2 most common arthropod sublitters were Diptera, so true flies, and, spiders, which represented about 1 out of every 5 arthropods that were collected.
Most spiders have venom, but most spiders do not have enough venom to actually hurt anybody. It's just they have venom because that's how they hunt. It's like even in North America, there are 2 major species of medically significant spiders, which is spiders that could potentially send you to the hospital. And both of those species are species that like to come in your house with you. The brown recluse, you'll find it in your house, in a cardboard box. Black widow, you'll find it in your garage, behind your grill. Like, they very much share spaces with human beings.
They're in my basement. Both species, I think, are in my basement.
You got both in your basement? Oh no, I'm sorry.
Well, but tell me why you shouldn't be sorry.
So once again, I'm going to have to agree with Charlie. Like, fear is useful. And one of the benefits that these animals do provide us is in death, in that they do facilitate the death of other animals. They facilitate the death of animals that would hurt us. Like Charlie mentioned rodents. Occasionally a big gnarly spider will take a rodent. Like there are species of tarantula that can very, very easily eat a small mouse. And also they kill mosquitoes, which kill far and away more of us than anything any other animal does.
They are the deadliest animal on the planet.
Yes, by like a long shot, just because they spread so many diseases and they're such a good disease vector.
The Centers for Disease Control and the World Health Organization both consider mosquitoes to pose the greatest threat to humans of any animal on Earth. Thanks to serving as vectors for some incredibly dangerous diseases like West Nile virus, dengue, and, of course, malaria, mosquitoes are considered to be responsible for more than 700,000 deaths a year. Comparatively, the WHO estimates that venomous snakes are responsible for between 81,000 to 137,000 deaths globally each year. And what about spiders? Well, Lynn Kimsey, who's an entomology professor at UC Davis, says that while spider bites can lead to medical complications and should be treated seriously, only about 100 deaths due to spider bites occurred worldwide in the entirety of the 20th century. So, yeah, treat snakes and spiders with respect, but honestly, keep an eye out for mosquitoes when you're outside, especially while traveling internationally.
Even mosquitoes have use in environment. They provide food for animals that eat small flying things, which is a lot of things, usually in mass because they have these giant like emergence events. So
things like bats.
Yes.
Which
yes.
Again, people have fears of bats. So that's another case of one fear lowering the number of another fear.
Yep. And mosquitoes are also potential pollinators. So the point is, everything that you are afraid of is useful to the environment, but there's nothing wrong with having that fear. It's just that I think it's also important that we recognize the outsized impact we have on the environment and the power we have to do something about it, if that makes sense. Like, we have the power, obviously, to change pretty much any ecosystem we come into contact with. And we also have indoor plumbing and smartphones, and we aren't going to go back. So we can use our big brains in order to think, what am I doing to this animal by reacting in what is a fully like fear state? And I think that's the big thing, really, is just the fear is fine, but acknowledging the consequences of acting on it is the most important thing.
I have found that fighting your fear with a little bit of knowledge is really helpful, because I think when people understand one thing that humans are really guilty of, I think, is losing sight of how interconnected everything is.
Exactly.
And we tend to think of ourselves as in isolation from nature, when in fact we are very much a part of nature, and not recognizing that we play such an important role, as you mentioned, in the ecosystem, but also not recognizing, because we set ourselves apart from it in so many respects, not realizing the role that these animals play, even these animals that we've villainized or demonized, like spiders and snakes. Once you understand their place in the food web, as Charlie mentioned, as both a predator and a prey item, and the same is true of spiders.
Yeah.
You suddenly understand that it has value. It has more facets to it than just being this object of fear that they have become for so many of us.
I'll add a little point here that I think spiders and snakes both share the same problem of no one can identify them.
For sure, yeah.
And so while people may have the fear of venomous spiders like brown recluses and black widows, and venomous snakes like rattlesnakes and copperheads, most people don't have the knowledge to identify those animals. And so they assume that every snake or spider they're seeing is one that can harm them. So I think that gaining that knowledge of learning what are the venomess spiders in your area. There's only two of them.
Yes.
Look
there
them up.
are only two of them.
and that is a real problem, because if you live in Tennessee or grew up in Tennessee, which I don't think neither one of you are from Tennessee, right?
No.
Okay. Well, I can tell you that coming from East Tennessee, the number of times I was told that don't swim in that lake because there are water moccasins there. I could not tell you how many times I heard that and from how many people, despite the fact that water moccasins range does not extend to this part of Tennessee.
I had a guy come up to me one time and told me that he shot his boat to kill a water moccasin that had fallen into it. That was very clearly a water snake. And sunk it.
Oh, no.
So that this is where I think where I'm going with this is I feel like a little bit of knowledge can actually be more of a dangerous thing for the animals, I think, because you mentioned brown recluse and black widow rose. Both of those species are ones that for a lot of people, especially in this part of the country, they're trigger words because they don't know how many venomous or spiders there are, but they do know those two particular ones.
Yes. And those
so
are the only two.
But in their heads, every brown spider is a brown recluse.
For sure.
And in your case, Charlie, we know in Tennessee we're taught copperheads, rattlesnakes, was it eastern diamondback or timber rattlesnakes?
Both.
Yeah.
Okay. And then cottonmouths.
Yeah.
Water moccasins. And because we're taught in this state, these are the ones to watch out for. People assume that every water snake in every part of the state must be a water moccasin.
Yes.
Completely setting aside the fact that a lot of snakes, like you mentioned, the queen snake and the aptly named water snake live in water.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so they know just enough to know that those are like a snake that lives in the water is a dangerous animal. And therefore they conflate that with all snakes in the water are dangerous because they all must be water moccasins.
Well, all the venomous snakes are big and scary. And so they get a lot more attention. And so people hear those names over and over again. Yeah. And that's what they associate with snakes. When you hear about snakes and the only snakes you're hearing about are the venomous snakes. I mean, I've seen people see a black rat snake in the wild and ask if it was a black mamba because they don't know that black mambas live in Africa and that they're not here and that they're also not black, but they've heard the word black mamba and associated it with danger and snakes so many times that that's what they think of when they think of snakes.
So what then, we presented the problem, let's offer a solution. What is the best way that people can correctly identify and exercise the appropriate amount of restraint and avoidance for the right animals? Offer your suggestions.
Yeah, like I was saying before, there's not that many venomous snakes generally in your area. So that's a good place for you to start. Look up copperheads. Look up how to identify them. There's hundreds of very great guides that are put out by the states, by resource agencies, maybe by us, that can help you identify the more dangerous snakes in your area that you can avoid.
As Charlie suggests here, there are a wealth of resources online for properly identifying the animals that you encounter in the wild, especially reptiles like snakes. Here in Tennessee, the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency has a dedicated online guide to identifying the 32 species that are native to the volunteer state. 28 of them are non-venomous and 4 are venomous. Similar guides can be found on Wildlife Management, Fish and Game, and Natural Resource Agency pages for most states. The Aquarium's digital members magazine, Riverwatch, also has a brief overview of snake ecology and how to avoid incidents with them. Links to both of these are in the show notes.
Once you've gotten that down and you understand what those animals look like, then branch out and start identifying the non-venomous snakes, because there's a lot more of them, and some of them are more complex to understand, like which ones are which. But just by looking at snakes more often, you're going to be able to see those differences and to understand which snakes are venomous and to be avoided and which ones you can appreciate and get a little bit closer to.
Rose, any suggestions?
So there are a couple of things I want to say here as well. Just kind of piggybacking off stuff that Charlie previously said. The interesting thing with spiders in particular is when it comes to identification, when it comes to how fortunate we are right here in Tennessee compared to other parts of the world, if you see a big, terrifying looking spider, the more scary that spider is, the less dangerous it is to you. The less wolf spiders, not dangerous at all, kill a lot of pests. Fishing spiders, not dangerous to us at all, kill a lot of pests. I think that's really the big thing. And the spiders we do have, once again, that are scary are just small, tiny little guys. And also, I'm trying to find a way to say this that isn't, it's not that bad. Sorry. You can go online and find a lot of really nasty looking brown recluse bites that are almost half staph infections, and some of them are just somebody got like a nail. Doctors are notoriously not great at identifying spider bites, and it's really hard to identify a spider bite without the spider there. And I'm bringing all this up so I can tell you that the vast majority of brown recluse bites are just, you swell up for a couple of days and it goes away. They are genuinely not as terrifying as people think they are. And that's pretty much it. And once you learn what, like Charlie mentioned, what these individual spiders look like, how to identify them, how to tell the difference between them and, say, a southern house spider, which looks a lot like a brown recluse, but is a lot bigger and is also nearly blind and more likely to charge under your foot. So if you have a spider in your house that looks kind of like a brown recluse, but it's big, it's got long legs and long mouth parts and is charging under your leg, you're probably looking at a male southern house spider. And I think that's the main thing with spiders, is you also need to learn to identify the two main venomous ones. And also you have to acknowledge that it's really the worst case scenarios are the ones that are blown up in the media.
All right, I think this is a pretty good time for us to wrap up this really long episode of the Podcast Aquatic. And it did go a little bit long, but I think that's okay, because talking about snakes and spiders, especially fear of snakes and spiders, is a pretty loaded topic, and there's a lot to kind of wade through. I think we did a pretty good job of doing that. I don't think that we've done anything to actually convince anybody who is afraid of spiders or afraid of snakes to necessarily love either of those kinds of animals, but hopefully we've done a decent job of presenting the case for why, even if you don't love them, you should at least respect them and understand the value that they hold in ecosystems in which they exist. And if we've done that, I feel like we've done our job. So Rose, Charlie, thank you so much for taking the time to lend us your expertise and present your case for why people should look more kindly on snakes and spiders.
You are very welcome.
Thanks for having me.
And if listening to this episode has given you any ideas for future topics that you'd like us to cover, email your suggestion to podcast@tnaqua.org. And while you're online, make sure that you like and subscribe to the podcast. That really helps us out in terms of giving us better play with the algorithms. Anyway, I hope you've learned something, and we look forward to you joining us on the next episode of the Podcast Aquatic.